Welcome back, everyone. Just Luke and I here today to talk to you about the topic of seasons in our lives of relational imbalance. And the reason that we're having this conversation is there's nuance to so many different topics, and we think it is so important to make sure that is covered and covered well. Because typically, what you see in our content and what you see in other mental health content is relationships should be mutual, they should be balanced. And while that is a foundational principle of relationships, there is a time and a place where actually there is intentional and purposeful imbalance. So that is what we're going to flesh out today.
And what we're going to use to help us with this conversation is Dr. Jake Porter's analogy of being on and off the coaster relationally. And when we talk about a coaster, we're talking about like a coffee coaster or a cup coaster that's on the table. When both people are on that coaster, that's both people are engaged in the relationship. We're not talking about a roller coaster or something. So that's kind of the picture that we're giving, both of them being on a coffee coaster. He uses it specifically for when there's a time of betrayal. And so being on the coaster where there's trust, where you're both invested in the relationship, you're all in, you're open to being vulnerable with each other. So that's being on the coaster. But when there is a time where there's betrayal, that means one person has gotten off the coaster and one person is left on the coaster, not knowing that the other person has gotten off. So when the betrayal has been revealed, there is going to be a time after that. And I see this a lot, like we'll say the man has done the betrayal. After he is revealed, a lot of times that man will want to get back on the coaster and feel much better, feel relieved, and have a lot of hope. But at that time, the premise that we're going to be using to have this conversation, ideally, yes, we want both partners on the coaster. But the reality is if whether it's a betrayal, it's abusive patterns, there may be large seasons where one partner needs to be off the coaster. But there's also times where there may be just circumstantial hurts or harm that is done, and a partner is going to want to get off the coaster. And when this happens, the one that's caused the harm, they're going to feel like it's unfair, especially over as time goes past. They're going to be like, I'm doing all of these things. I'm doing everything they asked me to do. I'm being accountable. I'm going to counseling. I'm helping out around the house. I'm being honest. I'm having these conversations. But it's only one way. Like she's not doing her counseling, or when I have a need, it's not important, or she doesn't feel safe connecting with me, or sometimes it's like we haven't had sex in months, and a lot of times it's put in this idea of, and I have needs. But in this situation, it isn't about fairness and equality. It's about
Right.
safety. Safety that the partner that's been hurt should not be expected to get back on the coaster until it's safe. And in risk of complicating things, another analogy is the picture being in a car and the driver drives recklessly and gets in an accident, and the partner is in the hospital or has to go through physical therapy. Once they get better, the car is fixed, they get out of the hospital, they may not want to jump right back into that car. They may need some more physical therapy, some of their own counseling, and they might have to see that person get maybe some driving lessons or a period of time where they're driving safely, or short periods of time driving with them where they're safe before they trust them back in the car or them driving. And so that one emphasizes the importance of safety.
Yeah, actually, both of those analogies, I think they're really complementary. The car crash one, I think we first heard from Andrew Bauman, and they both show how there are circumstances where it actually becomes acceptable where one person in a relationship has less power and more responsibility. Whereas usually we would say, well, in a healthy relationship, that shouldn't be the case. There should be a really complementary, like, flow,
Shared.
back and forth and of give and take. And it should be mutual. But really, there are these times where it should not be mutual. For healing to actually happen and for a mutual partnership to take place eventually, it's completely acceptable and warranted where one person is going to have less power and more responsibility to repair and rebuild the relationship. Um, and there's some situations, Luke's mentioned a few, but we'll just whenever we talk, just know that it's not comprehensive. We haven't sat and thought of every possible situation. And actually, we really prefer to podcast without taking a lot of notes because we want it to be, like an overflow of our experience and wisdom and insight kind of just naturally coming versus something really scripted. We think that that's kind of the fun of podcasting. But in this topic, there are different scenarios that we could think of from working with clients and just our understanding where this would be appropriate, this relational imbalance. So Luke mentioned abuse, and that would be a very clearly, overtly abusive relationship, or also someone who has abusive behaviors that may be circumstantial or maybe, at times when they're really dysregulated or they're in a really deep, dark depression season, they've lost their job, they've lost their motivation, they've lost their purpose, or, there's a child with terminal illness and the stressors are so high. And so there are some abusive behaviors coming out, scenarios where life is really difficult and it's bringing out the worst in someone, and behaviors can become abusive in those instances. This would also apply to those situations. Um, Anything you want to add there, Luke?
Yeah, and we've talked about over functioning and under functioning. Even in those situations where you're trying to shift the patterns of over and under functioning, the over functioner might want to step off the coaster in some areas
Yeah.
to make space for the under functioner to show that they want to take ownership, that they're seeing where they're under functioning, they're taking responsibility, they're taking steps to balance out that power. And so there might be even a shift there in relational dynamics of them wanting to not feel safe in certain situations to engage fully in so that they don't go back into that codependent or over functioning um, role in making sure the other person is sincere in wanting to make that shift and change. And so this would be a situation where it's okay for them to stay off the coaster until they're assured that the other partner is um, willing and capable of making the changes that they say they want to do to limit or change the underfunctioning and balance the engagement.
Yeah, and I would add to that, it seems like this scenario, because it's not abusive behaviors, I mean, it could be mixed, right? It could be both. But if it's not abusive behaviors, it's just the over and under functioning dynamic that's really ingrained in the relationship. I would say it's almost like a one foot on the coaster, if I can complicate
Yeah.
the symbolism even more. Like, okay, I'm here. I'm off the coaster a bit to see you step into your power more and
Yeah.
to stop these underfunctioning behaviors and patterns. But I'm here to work with you. Because I think if in that situation, if the overfunctioner just takes hands off completely and kind of walks away, it's going to create a lot of abandonment, a lot of attachment triggers, and the challenge with that in this scenario is that level of protection might not be necessary. Whereas
And that's
in
a
an abusive dynamic, it probably is very necessary.
that's a great point. And I think important to note, like even maybe to explain that sometimes that there's a difference between like 1 foot on the coaster, 1 foot off, or like 3 steps off the coaster versus 15 steps off the coaster. The intentionality and severity of the abuse or dysfunction dictates, yeah, and gives permission how far off they get off the coaster and how long they stay off the coaster. This is where it's important to that you might not know how to navigate this and uh, whether it's okay to be off the coaster or how long. And this is where it might be important to seek professional help and have guidance, help them walk you through and navigate this power imbalance that needs to happen in order for healing trust to grow and even navigate what feels safe and appropriate, whether it's 1 foot off the coaster, 3 steps off the coaster, or 15 steps off the coaster.
Yeah. And another dynamic that's important to acknowledge when we're talking about imbalanced relationships and sometimes why that's necessary is the broader societal systems of patriarchy, misogyny, and the reality that for a heterosexual couple who's together, that woman's experience with men is not just with the person that's in front of her. Her experience
Right.
with men has been shaped from father, brothers, early experiences with men, maybe abusers, the people she's dated, the people who have betrayed her, the people who have hurt her, the broader social structure that is accepted and tolerated, and people that commit harm against women with impunity. Those are all factors that go into any partnership, regardless of how good the partnership is. And that one's a bit more abstract and maybe hard for men, and for instance, to recognize that it is appropriate and supportive to grant more power to their female partners in light of the conditioning that we are all a part of to build trust, to prove the genuineness of your safety as a man. And over time, that develops and that becomes robust, and the power will naturally balance out from there.
And what that may look like is in different situations, the man has to stay on that coaster and give more relationally, extend more safety to their partner uh, before it is reciprocated, before
Yeah.
the trust is verbalized or given, or they get on that coaster and engage emotionally, sexually, depending on the situation, that the man's gonna, in that situation, the man's gonna have to stay on that coaster and show the legitimacy, the safety before the woman reciprocates and feels safe to get on that coaster in that area of the relationship.
And then even later on, I'm thinking of, throughout our relationship and with our parenting, like there has almost been, and this might feel hypocritical to folks, and you can work through that, but we understand it, that just the idea of me raising my voice at the kids has a different impact than you raising your voice at the kids. And
Right.
it's like someone could look at that and be like, oh, well, that's a really imbalanced relationship. That's not fair. When really we've just come to understand that our social conditioning and these systems that we're all a part of, whether we want to be or not, are real. And the
Mm.
impacts and implications of them are very, very real. So expectations might look different in different areas because of that.
To add to that, it's a little bit of a shift, but even like traditional gender roles, we intentionally, I do the dishes more, not because I like to do them or whatever, but it's like in order to like stop toxic masculinity or gender roles or gender stereotypes, sometimes we have to push in an area
Right.
where it's not traditional roles in order to break those ideas. And it could feel like, well, we should be doing dishes 50-50. Well, not necessarily. I mean, that's
Mhm.
based on your relationship. You can decide that. When we look at these even gender roles and gender stereotypes, it might be messing with the analogy a little bit because it's not that you don't feel safe to do the dishes or, but there's like there is a power differential where I need to stand on that coaster in the maybe some of the house chores. And it's not, well, you have to get on the coaster with me and do it 50-50. It's like, no,
Right.
in this area, you can get off the coaster. I'll take over. And it's
Mhm.
not safety issue, but like just responsibility. So it might
Right.
be a little tricky there that it's not you're staying on the coaster. And so in this situation, it'd be like staying on the coaster to do 50-50.
Yep.
And that's what's equal and fair. And sometimes the male might give permission, like, hey, you can get off the coaster here. I'm not expecting you to meet me halfway, kind of thing.
And I think a lot of folks have a problem with carrying the responsibility of anyone but themselves in the sense of, well, I'm a good man, so it should just be a blank slate. Like that is
Right.
fantasy. That is not reality. And a good man will recognize the context which he is living in. And it is really powerful to say, yeah, I recognize those who have gone before me. And because of that, I am acting in this manner. This can also be true of white folks. Sometimes we have a really hard time saying, well, I didn't own any slaves and I didn't participate in Jim Crow. So why do I need to, go above and beyond to make sure that I'm being racially sensitive and to make sure that I'm sharing my power with the people of color around me. Like we are so hyper individualistic in the West that we don't want to live within context, which is as in a way not living in reality. We don't want to live in reality. We want to live in how we think it should be, but how is it? That's the really that's a lot of this whole conversation is what is really here, what's really happened in our relationship and what's happened around us contextually, and how do I move forward in the most loving way, which sometimes looks like allowing an imbalance, welcoming an imbalance in a certain area of a relationship or for a certain time in the relationship.
Absolutely. Yep. I think it's really well said. As we're talking about this, it might look like as the white male or the husband, I'm losing some of my power, but really it's I'm like taking off some of my powers so that there is more equal power.
Mm.
So even in this situation, it's not necessarily power imbalance. It's more I'm taking off some of my power so that we have more equal shared power.
Right, you're sharing from an overabundance of power.
Exactly. Bring the invitation to share power. Like,
Yep.
as a white male, I'm going to have more power. So I have to be intentional to go against gender roles or toxic masculinity. That doesn't mean because I'm a white male that I don't matter. It's I don't matter any more than a white female or a person of color. I don't matter more.
Right.
So I need to balance it out by bringing myself down and equalizing the shared power.
And I
Does
think
that make
that's what
sense?
yeah, it does. And I feel like I was so drawn to you as a teen because you embodied this we were in a culture that um that what to say, Luke? I don't even know what to say. We
Well, yeah, if people have been around for any time at all, they know that our culture that we grew up in was not that of a balanced, that saw balanced power, shared, that
right,
valued balanced power.
hierarchy and systems of power and control were not just part of the culture, they were the culture. So I was very drawn to you seeing a man who was strong, physically athletic, funny, sarcastic, goofy, like I was taught, masculinity only can look, but that also was super compassionate, caring, ultra considerate to a to a fault. Um, really interested and seeking out of other people's perspectives and stories. It was just so attractive to me because it was like the whole package of a human, and I didn't see it much in men. I saw those qualities primarily in women and how they were essentially exploited and used in women to tolerate imbalanced power, essentially, and how and what that did to more vulnerable people. So you have always modeled that. And then the more we've learned along the way, it was like really natural for you to share your power because you already had that foundation of care for people. So, ode to
Hmm.
Luke. That's my little moment of
Well, I
appreciation.
appreciate that, babe, and I've definitely done it imperfectly and continue to learn. But yeah, my heart is definitely to love people, care about people, and value people.
Yeah. Well, you are succeeding, in my opinion, and many of the opinions of those who know you closely. So it is possible for men to embody the fullness of humanity, not just these certain rigid traits that we associate with masculinity. Talk about imbalance. That's a whole nother episode.
And as we were talking about this, this is also why what I see a lot of men have struggle with when they
Mm,
have done something wrong, giving up some of that power to equal out the playing field,
yeah,
or and allowing the partner to get off the coaster, stay off the coaster. Because in my experience, who I've been working with, men are not used to sharing power. And
right.
so when they are asked to share power or expected to share power or needing to share power for the benefit of a relationship, it is so rare. They haven't seen other men do it and they don't know how to do it. So it's like, I did a little bit, so I'm a good boy. So can you come back on the coaster?
Yeah.
And then there's not the regulation or even the to know what to do with these emotions and these feelings and these sensations when it's like, I can't get you back on the coaster. I
Mm,
I don't know how to get connection back with you. And it's because we're not asked to share power. We're not asked to intentionally take off our power. To any men that are out there listening, like, it's not because you're a bad person that you want your partner to get back on the coaster, that you or you want them to see how much you're trying, your efforts, and you want that pat on the back. That's understandable, but that's a lot of your own story and dysregulation and attachment wounds that you haven't practiced or been asked to taught how to resourced, how to regulate not having the most power in the room, and
right.
specifically white men. And so just want to share that pushback and resistance to not getting your partner back on the coaster and having to continue to share power or continue to feel like you're powerless, but really you're just equal. That's an uncomfortable feeling for those of us that aren't used to feeling that and don't know how to navigate those
Yeah.
dynamics.
And then on top of that, when you have harmed your partner and she is not coming back on that coaster anytime soon, it is extremely dysregulating and your attachment will be very affected on top of already feeling not being used to just basic sharing of power. It is
Right.
going to be really imbalanced in a lot of these scenarios, particularly when there's abuse or addiction or betrayal, when those dynamics are involved. I would say this is probably one of the big reasons why it's so unlikely for relationships to make it through that in a healthy way. Not impossible, we
Yeah.
see it, but it is going to cost you so much of your own inner work and inner regulating yourself constantly because you're not going to be getting that from her. You lost
Right.
the right, I don't know if that's the right word. You lost that reciprocity of relationship when you've betrayed, abused, or gone into addiction. And granted that there's reasons behind all of that. That's not to say there isn't, but you've broken the relational contract by doing that. And for her to, and you can interchange this between him and her, or him and him, her, whatever. We're just using
Yeah.
the common thread that we see. But for her to need to back off and expect you to go do your shit, to get into healthy routines so that you can have more stability that way, to go to your therapy, to be exercising or doing yoga or doing breath work, to be reaching out to healthy friends who can give you some of that human contact and co-regulation because you're feeling so alone without your partner, to be reading or listening to podcasts or spending time in nature, like all of that work to reconnect with yourself so that you can um, fortify yourself to be able to do the long haul work that it will take for you to be a sustainably healthy person, for your partner to eventually decide, okay, I am ready to take 2 steps towards the coaster. I'm ready to put my foot up on the coaster. I'm ready for a trial time to come up on the coaster with you eventually and see if this is, real, if this is genuine change. That is going to take so much work. And the person is already really struggling if they're doing things like betraying or abusing or getting into an addiction, they've got a lot going on. They don't have a solid base if those things are happening. So all that to say is it is hell of a lot of work to repair a relationship when the partner needs to get off the coaster because of your choices. That is going to be one of the hardest things you ever do. And we're not about to sugarcoat that.
Yeah, great, well said. And just reminded me of it's never the person that has done the harm to decide when it's time for the other person to get back on the coaster, when they need to be
Right,
ready. They need to continue to create safety and be trustworthy until the other person's nervous system, body, mind decides it is safe to take a step closer, to put a foot on, to have a trial
right,
time. Like doing quote unquote good behaviors, being trustworthy does not equal a reciprocity from the other partner.
right. And they might even decide that they can't. And
Yep.
a person who's truly healing and truly changing would honor that and would bless
Yep.
them and let them go in peace instead of, oh, now you're not going to take me back. Well, I'm going to make your life a living hell because you rejected me. If a person
Yeah.
truly understands the impact of their behavior, they will be open completely to what the other partner wants. And if the other partner decides there's too much harm, there's just too much, decimation within our relationship that I cannot move forward pursuing a healthy relationship, that's also a totally possible outcome. And if a person really values the partner they've harmed, that will be obviously beyond heartbreaking and very difficult grief process, but that will be honored and facilitated even. Okay, definitely resonating with this idea. What would you say are some directions for them to move forward in this?
Yeah, I think it's going to look different depending on the situation, relationship severity. Is it something I've done, or do I need to take steps in my relationship to implement this? Whether it's my partner has done something that's hurtful and I haven't felt safe engaging in a relationship, and I don't know why I haven't felt safe, but I feel like I'm supposed to continue engaging. If that's the feeling, then okay, maybe you need to take a foot off the coaster. You need to take a couple steps off the coaster. Is there something that your partner's done that has made you feel unsafe? So I think you, at first, you're just kind of being curious and assessing your relationship. is this present or is there a need for this to be present? If it does need to be present, then you're working towards taking a step to implement them, getting off the coaster, communicating that, why you need that space. If it's already there, communicating it clearly of, hey, I'm noticing this dynamic that I haven't felt safe to be totally engaged, and this is why.
Yeah.
Um, and then learning how to put up that boundary. It's about controlling your safety, not somebody else's behaviors. So it's like, I'm expecting to be treated this way. If you can treat me this way, then we can continue being in a relationship. If you can't, then I need to stay off the coaster. It's
Yeah.
not be a good person or else, or stop doing this or else I'm leaving you or I'm divorcing you. It might get to that point. It's more I need this in a relationship.
Right.
In order to engage in a relationship, I need to feel this way. I need these interactions. And if I don't feel that, I'm not in a relationship.
Yeah.
So, if you're needing to get off the coaster, noticing that and putting up those boundaries and expectations, and then holding to them, which is really difficult. If you're on the other side and you feel like your partner is off the coaster and there's nothing, it doesn't feel like anything you can do to get them back on the coaster, I would encourage you to be curious. What have you done? Where was there harm? Even asking your partner, hey, I'm giving them this podcast and say, I'm noticing this dynamic in our relationship, and I know I've done things. Can we talk about it? Seeing a therapist, if you're seeing this or seeing the need for this. So if your partner's been harmed and need to put up the boundaries, you need support to put up those boundaries. What boundaries to put up? How, what are they healthy boundaries? Are they realistic boundaries? How do I enforce these boundaries? It's going to be really hard. So you're going to need support. If you're the person that has to stay on the coaster, you're going to need help to talk through all those struggles of the attachment wounds or abandonment fears of your partner not getting back on the coaster quick enough or not
Wow.
being willing to validate or affirm your efforts because they're healing. So you're going to need a space to process those emotions, and your partner is not going to be that person at this time.
Right.
And then there's just patience, patience for your partner to feel safe to get on the coaster, patience for yourself. If you're off the coaster, patience for yourself that you don't have to get on the coaster anytime soon, not until you're ready. And it's going to take time depending on the weight of the harm. There is no script or timeline that if this is the harm, then you need to be back on the coaster in 3 days. If this is, it's 6 weeks. And no, it's individual. The person who has been harmed has the power to decide if and when they get back on that coaster or move towards that coaster.
Very well said. Yep. I think that is a really good primer on that topic and that idea, and I hope it's valuable for folks. And we just really appreciate you listening and considering this. And always please share this with friends or family that may benefit from particular topics, as we do cover a wide range under the trauma healing umbrella. So we hope to see you next time on Field to Flourish.